Good evening. This is 2020 Church, and I'm Pastor Larry Enriquez. I'm glad you're here with me on this evening. We're with us because there's more than you. But that said, we're kind of in this weird time. I was telling my wife just the other day how by the very nature of TV and movies and all of the what was once Hollywood, now it's bigger than Hollywood. But this almost global ability to create media that is so influential, and that over the years, cultures, our Western culture have been changed by, for instance, I heard a Jackson 5 song the other day, and I said, honey, man, those songs, because everybody could hear them at once, really changed, how we functioned as a society, as a culture, and this strengthened the power of that. So I was watching a little show that happened to be on that my grandkids were watching when I walked into the room. My wife had turned it on for them. Without getting into the name of the little movie, it was about a young boy who was a boy genius, who was in high school, and it was clear through it's funny, cute kid. It's got it's kind of a odd but yet endearing family that he's a part of, but he's an atheist, and he's a boy of science. In fact, he says, no, I don't believe in God. I believe in science. So that in itself has kind of a comedic air to it, if you've seen Nacho Libre. But the point is, to be fair, a life and death circumstance comes into this young boy's life, and he's found going into a chapel at a hospital, and then their narrator, the one who's again giving the thoughts of a boy now that he's a man, kind of gives a sheepish sense of why he's in the chapel, but he's making an attempt at if there is a God. So he's into this chapel. As it is, his family goes to church. I'll make this point here. His family goes to church. But the downside of that is that the family doesn't necessarily act like they're God-loving people. Nonetheless, it gives the writers and the directors an opportunity to make the pastor look like an idiot. It's just kind of the nature of movies. Let's make anybody who claims to be Christian or God-fearing look moronic and antiquated and out of sorts and not in touch with, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on. And there are some good films, of course, that I think depict genuine Christian faith, but most of them do not. Certainly not the popular movies. Make fun of Christians, and especially they make fun of pastors when they can, and maybe we deserve it. But God certainly doesn't, and nor does the truth deserve that. Because as it is, the questions that are raised in these movies and or little series, in other words, raised by the main character in one of these movies, is such that the answer from the Christian side or from the pastoral side is very weak and shallow, and almost, again, they look moronic. And the little boy looks like he's the champion. So it got me thinking. I thought, well, to keep on track, this is the Lenten season. And I was ruminating on this show, thinking how important it is for us to be ready in and out of season to give answers for our faith, but how important it is for us to meditate on really what our faith is and who it's in. And I realize that we don't meditate well, but that is a Western culture. Maybe you do. Sometimes, we look at daydreaming, we call that meditating. I suppose it can be, but usually daydreaming infers that we're meditating all kinds of crazy things. But I would suggest that if we're going to daydream, let's be very conscious of God's presence, that we dream our dreams before Him, that we think our thoughts before Him, that we bring all of our thoughts to Him, that we learn to meditate in that we are learning the presence of God in our thought life. And so as I was thinking about this show, I thought, what kind of answer would I give? Because in the show, the boy out loud in church proclaims he doesn't believe in God. So the pastor has him come up and sit with him on the step as they go back and forth over some things. And the answers are very superficial and silly in some regards. But it got me thinking, what would I say if a little boy came up to me in church and said, I don't believe in the existence of God, and this is why? And what would be my answer to that little boy or anybody else, frankly? So thinking on those things and other things, I'm not here to give you the answers to all of that. They're not that hard, really. But how the Word tells us that we are to let the words of our mouth and the meditation of our hearts, that they would be acceptable talking to God in your sight. O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Let me read that verse to you. It's out of Psalm 19, and it's the last verse in that psalm. So we want to look at some verses prior to verse, I think it might even be 19, but here's the verse. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. The psalmist here, most likely David, in fact, is making a proclamation at the very end of this Psalm 19. And it's, O Lord, my strength and my... Here's who you are, Lord, and here's who you are to me. He's very personal about that. You're my strength and my Redeemer. You're the one who has saved me. You're the one who has bought me from my life that would have been without God and was without God to a life that's with God, that I've been redeemed, I've been bought, I've been taken in, I've been secured in a new family. And there's all kinds of terms we can use that are biblical terms regarding, again, this position, this new position of being taken out of the world and into God's kingdom, that I'm a redeemed person. And he says in that, God, you are my strength. As one who's redeemed by you, you're my strength. And so I thought about that. What does it mean that God is my strength? Well, certainly it goes with that idea of God being, again, my Redeemer. Because when God is my Redeemer, something changes. My identity changes. And my identity, whom I'm connected to now, God, that in that relationship, I have strength in my new identity. So we can read also Romans 1:16 through 20. Let me read it to you in just a moment. By the way, that verse I just read to you out of Psalm 19 is Psalm 19:14. But in Romans 1:16 through 20, here's what it says. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth through unrighteousness. For what may be known about God is clear to them, since God has shown it to them. The invisible things about him, his eternal power and deity, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, and are understood by the things that are made, so that they are without excuse. So we come to this passage here that says that there's a whole world out there that proclaims the existence of God, and that because it is so clear and evident, it's so globally manifest, that no human beings in this general sense is without excuse, because God has made himself evident in his creation. So back again to Psalm 19. In Psalm 19, verse 14, when we find David proclaiming this thing to God. Well, I should say proclaiming, but he's making the statement to God, may the meditations of my heart, may they be pleasing to you. May what comes out of my mouth be pleasing to you. Well, let's look at the verses prior to that statement that is made. Here's what it says in Psalm 19, 1 through 6. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night declares knowledge. There is no speech, and there are no words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them has he set a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run a race. Its going forth is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit extends to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. Here's this proclamation of God's creation. And it's done in this metaphorical sense that what we have here is this beautiful picture, this poem really, of God's creation being met out in kind of that man-like or human metaphor. I love this portion of passage. And as the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork, day unto day utters speech. It's kind of like, here's God's creation from the heights that we can see upward. It's proclaiming down to us as this ongoing dialogue of God's existence. And the more we've gone up into space, the higher space is. It's not like we're close to a ceiling. And all that's ahead of us as we go upward proclaims the vastness of God, the wonder of God. It's incredible to hear this passage in light of our progression of science. That as science moves on to proclaim something to us, facts, truth about how things work, that even more so, the proclamation is that these things of order, these things of wonder, can only come from a God of design, a God who exists, a God who thinks and creates, and it's his beauty proclaimed to us in his creation. It's really a wonderful statement Science, not junk science, like men can become women, but I mean real science, proclaims the existence of God. So when we read Psalm 19, the very last verse, verse 14, may our hearts be meditating on the reality of God's goodness proclaimed all around us. We don't do that enough. I take walks with my grandchildren out the street that I live on, and we're fortunate. We live in the foothills, and we live in I say good because I'm very close to a store. I mean, I'm 5 minutes away from a big grocery store or any number of them, but still I'm in the foothills to the degree that we still have bears that knock down my trash cans and coyotes that make us bring in our little puppies at night. So we see creation and nature at a level that oftentimes you don't see in the city. We have all kinds of blooms and citrus and eucalyptus trees, and we have little wilderness areas that we can walk to, and I walk there with my children or grandchildren rather, and I like to proclaim it. I say, look up, look what God has given, look what God has done. I want them to see God's handiwork, because to make anything different of it would be criminal to what God has given us to see. In fact, if we read Psalm 19, 1 through 6, there is no speech and there are no words. Their voice is not heard. It's like there's this proclamation of God's handiwork everywhere. It's a beautiful piece of God's revelation to us. When we think about these things, God's revelation, when we meditate on his general grace and goodness to all the world, it really proclaims that no man is with excuse. But what's our response to that? Are we thanking God and praising him for the things that are before us? I want to remind you that this is our season of Lent. So I'm speaking this way so that we might take this time between now and Easter to reflect on the things that would bring us closer to experiencing the fullness of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. And our need to sometimes say to ourselves, Larry, get out of the way and get your mind out of the little things of life that want to block, by the enemy's efforts, the goodness and the wonder of God's presence. I can be so caught up in little things that really don't matter. We tend to get caught up in what I say is like the pettiness of life. And we make the petty things big things. Because we don't deal with them, they fester, they become big, and then we start allowing that to break down relationships. It's a big thing for me during this Lenten season, that we meditate on the Lord and his goodness in such a way that we get out of the way of being anything that would be destructive to relationships, and learn to be like God in the sense that we want to be redemptive in our relationships, not divisive. That we want to be restorative and not distant. That we want to be gracious and not legalistic. That we want to show mercy and kindness where we haven't. And as we think about God and his creation, all the more then we'll be personal with God. And we'll walk a life that is practicing his presence. That's the point of this psalm to me. That we practice his presence by recognizing who he is to us, both in the big and in the small. In fact, I'd like to read on to you out of Psalm 19, now 7 through 13. God's laws are perfect. They protect us, make us wise, and give us joy and light. Now, I want to reduce this to the 10 Commandments and then the 2 great commandments. I don't reduce it to by making those less, but there's all kinds of laws, but everything comes down to these particular laws. When it says God's laws are perfect, the 10 Commandments are a reflection of God's character, and it's perfect. They protect us, they make us wise, and give us joy and light. Let's not reject them because we can't fulfill them. Let's embrace them because it's a reflection of who God is. And we practice his presence when we obey them. And when we don't, then we confess and repent. And in that regard, we practice his presence. It says that God's laws are pure and they're eternal and that they're just. They are more desirable than gold. They are sweeter than honey, yes, even the honeycomb. For they warn us away from harm and give success to those who obey them. It's important to hear that last line there. It gives success to those who hear them? No, who obey them, who do them. But how can I ever know what sins are lurking in my heart? Cleanse me from these hidden faults. Back to Lent. We want to reflect in a way that we're genuine before God. And the way that we do that is recognizing who God is in all of the expanse, practicing his presence by acknowledging all that he is, even in the expanse of things. That is, we practice his presence and we find genuine grace and love in his company. That we would be real about the things that lurk in us in this translation. The things that keep us, the things that wall us up and keep us from people. Let's get rid of these wrongs. Help me stop doing them in this translation. Only then can I be free of guilt and innocent of some great crime. So we come before the Lord. And then it's after this statement that he says, again, let the meditations of my heart, the proclamation of my lips, let them be pleasing to you, Lord. You know, when I was thinking about this message and the existence of God, and in this little show, the science boy who's an atheist, I thought there's so much evidence for God. It's almost lunacy not to believe that God exists. The evidence for God on so many levels, scientific levels, doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden introduced to believing in Jesus, but that God exists. The first cause of limitless space must be infinite. The first cause of endless time must be eternal. The first cause of boundless energy must be omnipotent. The first cause of universal interrelationships must be omnipresent. The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient. The first cause of spiritual values must be spiritual. I mean, these are scientific statements being made by some scientists. The first cause of human integrity must be truthful. The first cause of human love must be loving. The first cause of life must be living. There must be a God. The fact that things are God caused is what science tells us. I've said it before in kind of this simple way. It'd be like me running, through the forest, jogging through some path, and I come into a big, beautiful open pasture, and there in the middle of it all is a beautiful, chromed out Harley Davidson. Man, I've lessened for one of those most of my life, and I've still not got one. But the fact is, there it is. It's absurd for me to think at any given time that over billions, millions, possibly billions of years, that because of time plus chance and plus energy, we now have a motorcycle. The belief that there isn't some designer behind that there isn't someone who constructed that out of a real mind that invented it is absurd. And you're much more complex than that motorcycle. But yet we're willing to say that about the human being. Well, I'm not trying to put anybody down out there who doesn't believe in Jesus. I don't know, maybe those who watch this, maybe we all do. And I'm just speaking to the audience or to the choir, so to speak. And I get that. But it just brought me to this idea that maybe somebody out there is watching. And sometimes we have all these arguments as why God isn't real, but really they're not scientific in nature or really even logical. They're just maybe emotional or relational. Maybe in some way or another you've been hurt. And life has hurt you. Somebody has hurt you. And your own guilt has hurt you. Your own wrong has hurt you. So how can there be a God? Who wants to believe in a God when life hurts? But I want to encourage you that your emotional distance from good, from life, from relationship because you've been hurt does not constitute that God doesn't exist. That's not a good argument. It just tells me that you're hurt and God is inviting you into himself to come to him. And yes, God has allowed things in your life. In fact, everything that's happened in your life, God has allowed. And maybe that's what you don't like about God. Well, talk to God about that. And pray that you would find in this Lenten season the beauty and wonder of a God who came to reconcile you, who came to die for you, to raise from the dead for you. Let me close with just a couple things because I just was looking at scientists and their various quotes. Johannes Kepler, one of the greatest astronomers, says, God is great. Great is his power, infinite his wisdom. Praise him, heaven and earth, sun, moon, and stars in your own language. My Lord and my Creator, I would like to proclaim this magnificence of your works to men to the extent that my limited intelligence can understand. That's one of the greatest astronomers ever who makes this proclamation. It almost sounds like Psalm 19. Copernicus, astronomer and first in-depth proponent of heliocentrism. Who could live in close contact with the most consummate order and divine wisdom and not feel drawn to the loftiest aspirations? Who could not adore the architect of all these things? The architect is God, is what he's saying. Or Isaac Newton, the founder of classical theoretical physics, says, what we know is a drop. What we do not know is a vast ocean. The admirable arrangement and harmony of the universe could only have come from the plan of an omniscient and omnipotent being. Well, God is, and God's personal, and God loves you. May this God, who is infinite and so grand, so majestic, may you know him in a personal way. During this Lenten season, may you draw close to him and recognize the beauty of what he's done for you. Well, God bless you. I love you, and thanks for spending some time with us here. I hope to see you at church on Sunday. I love you. Go in peace.